Hello and hello everybody, my name is Lucy and welcome to Books and Brushes, where today I'm doing my book stats video. The video I've been hyping up for myself for ages now. I'm a big geek, this should not be news to you, and I know this video is probably later than everybody else's stat video, but you know what, I don't care. I walk to the beat of my own drum, I do it in my own time, and I have lots of pretty numbers and charts to show you. So let's get just straight into it. This year I read 73 books, which you'll know if you watched all the books I read in 2020 video, and the amount of pages I read in those 73 books were 25,463. That's how many pages I read in total, which averages at about 2,121 pages a month, roundabout. That's my mean average. The average amount of pages I read for each book then was 348.80. Every book I read was around about 350 pages, or the mean average was, so that's pretty good. It shows I'm not reading tiddly books to get that 73. I own 381 books. Well, that was how many I owned at the end of 2020 or New Year's Eve. All these stats are up until the end of 2020, so now that we're almost at the end of January, some of these things might have changed. So that's how many books I owned at the end of 2020, and I gained 97 books, which sounds like way more than I thought. I thought I had only gained a few, but I guess just due to presents throughout the year, my birthday, and then the very beginning of the year when I got books. 97, wow, that's way more than I thought I'd gained. That makes me feel better. So out of those 381 books I have owned, 273 of them are physical books and 108 of them are on my Kindle. The months I read the absolute least were February and March, where I read 2 books apiece. Yikes. Although for the page counts for those 2 months, I read 920 pages in February and 713 pages in March. So I actually read the least amount in March. I wonder what happened in March. Who remembers? Did that affect it? Maybe. As for the months I read the most, that would be July and August, where I read 11 books in July and 11 books in August. Wow. I read 4,197 books in July. Not books, that'd be crazy. Pages. And 4,145 pages in August. I keep wanting to say books. Which means I actually read the most in July, which is kind of cool. I always tend to read a lot during the summer. The reading rush always helps, although I don't know if I'm doing that next year because of everything that happened with 2020's reading rush. I was going to make a video on that and then never did. Now let's talk about the books I read versus the books I didn't read. I have read 236 of the books I own, which is pretty good, and I have left unread 145 books. It means I've definitely read more books that I own than I haven't read. So that's pretty nice that I've read most of them. I've read 182 of these physical books and not read 91 of them. So that's pretty good. And as for my Kindle books, I have read 54 and not read 54. Super split down the middle, which is kind of funny. I have this lovely little pie chart here to show you this. The 2 slices in green are the ones I have read, the 2 pinky ones are the ones that I haven't read, and then the 2 of the same size in the top left are the Kindles. Interesting, I've read a lot more books than I haven't read, especially the physical books, which makes sense because I mostly own the physical books. Let me tell you about some of my booktuber stats. I uploaded 46 videos in 2020, which I think is a good number. My subscriber count at the end of 2020 was 185, which has gone up 10 in January. I gained 78 subscribers since 2019 to 2020. That's, you know, not a lot for a lot of people, but for me, growth is growth. I'll take whatever growth I get. It's not why I do it anyway, so, you know, you gotta be happy with it. And some of my favorite videos that I did upload this year, I'm really proud of my vlogs. I'm not a vlogger, I don't vlog very often, but I did do 2 vlogs for the reading rush and 1 vlog for when I moved, and they were so difficult to do, but they're so fun to watch back, and I'm very proud of them, and I think they're fun to watch. I'm really proud of those vlogs. I loved my rainbow shelf video, and I always like the pride videos, the gay books I want on my wish list, and all those types of videos. My June videos are always fun. I did a rant review this year, which I'm not prone to, but oh my god was it fun, because I needed to vent that awfulness. I very rarely read books that have that much bad passion for, because I hate it. 8 Pieces of Garbage was a great video for me. I think it's really entertaining, so I was very proud of that one. I did a tag this year. I did a few actually, but 2 Sides of Darkness was my favourite tag. I really enjoyed it. It's quite complicated for a lot of people, found it difficult, but I thought it was a really creative tag and I really enjoyed putting it together and trying to come up with my own answers. And the mystery gift haul with Matthew. That video was so much fun. The excitement, my real life reactions, which I could watch back and show to my friends. That was a really fun video as well. Favourite booktubers this year. There are so so many because I've been trying to find all the new booktubers. I want to watch them all, but there's only so much time I have in the day. My favourites this year are 100% Connor from Connor's Library Corner. I love this man, he is a gem. Kaz over at Cats and Camera, our booktube queen, I love her. Mina from Mina Reads, I've thoroughly enjoyed her videos so much this year. Books and Bargains is a brilliant channel that I've really enjoyed watching this year. Such a different vibe, and I love the vibe. The charity hauls and everything, really cool channel. And Lala Loves Lit, she always makes me laugh. Really love her vibe, and just a really cool person to chat with in comments. So those are my favourite booktubers in 2020. There are so many more I could name, but those are the ones that jump out to me right this moment. Alright, now getting on to types of books I read and the stats and all of the beautiful pie charts I have for this. So let's go. First off, let's talk about the people of colour books, or the BIPOC section. So what I decided to do for this and for the queer category as well, I've split it up into 3 different sections, and I could split it up even further, but god, there were so many numbers and there's only so many stats I could do. I went a little bit crazy. I split it up into main, side and none. So what that means is main is where the main character was black or any person of colour. A lot of the other ones were Asian and they were the main characters. Side means that there were representation and good people of colour as side characters, but they weren't necessarily the main character, but they were in the book. And then the none is where there wasn't really any BIPOC characters to note or that I could remember or that really did anything in the story, so little to no BIPOC characters. So this is that chart. We got 16 of the books were main characters, 17 of the books were side characters, and 40 of the books were not really enough to be of note. So still majority white, which we're trying to curb and cut down, but 16 and 17 collectively being a total of 33 BIPOC reads, kind of, depends if you count the side. But I found this really difficult to split because that's why I did main characters, side characters, and then no characters, because otherwise the finite details of, okay, well there is like this really cool black character in that, but they're not a main character, so does that count? It's really difficult to split these things up and make it, not try and sway it to look a certain way. I'm not trying to sway the numbers to make it look like I read more black books than I did. I'm not trying to do that, but it's very difficult where you split the categories. I'm definitely improved from last year. I don't really have a stat for this for last year because I don't know where it went, but next year I will have this video to return to. Last year I definitely didn't read this many black and people of colour books, so it's on its way up. We are improving, but there's definitely still room to grow in that category. I also made a chart to split the types of BIPOC characters because that can mean so many different things. I did it and then realised it was a 50-50 exact split, so it was 50-50 between black and Asian. So that kind of shows me that I definitely need to read more different types of characters, like Indigenous people or Hispanic, other types of people. So that was very interesting that it was either black or Asian. Very interesting to me. And that is why I do these charts, so I can see the gaps and the things that I'm missing or where it's swaying. So next, the LGBTQ+ chart, and the same thing, the main, the side and the none. I'm going to say gay books just for it to be easier to say. There were 16 gay books, 8 side character gay books and 49 straight books. Now I'm not too happy with this one because I always try and read gay books. I like it when gay characters are in books because same as the black and the people of colour, it's surrealism, right? The real world has people of colour and queer people, so they should be in books and I like to read about these characters. But for this one, there was a fair number of gay books where the main characters were gay. So little side characters that were gay, and I don't know why that is, but I'm very disappointed with that slice in particular. Why are there so many books that have 0 gay characters and not enough books that have side gay characters? A stat that I think I want to improve for next year for sure. I think it's because a book is either, oh, it's all about the gay main character and the gay struggle and all that stuff, or that it's just straight and there's nothing in it. And I don't like how little in between there is in this category. I don't know if that's a thing that the publishing industry needs to fix or something that I hope I can improve on in my future. It's very difficult to know whether gay characters are going to be side characters and whether they're going to be of any prominence before you pick up a book. So it's not a stat I can particularly try and improve on, but it's a stat I definitely want to be better next year because that's just weird to me. No gay characters in a story just seems like somebody's in the closet. Now, I would split this up into types of queer characters. You got your gays, your lesbians, your bis, your trans, you got your aces, all of that jazz. I was going to split it up, but then I realised most of them were either gay or bi, and it wasn't that interesting split, and it was too difficult to determine. Sexuality is fluid. A lot of the books, the characters weren't sure themselves. Sometimes I'm like, were they gay or were they bi? I can't remember. I know that they liked same gender, but they could have been bi, and I could not remember where a lot of these characters went, so I thought making a stat for it would have been disingenuous because the numbers would have been me guessing, and I don't want to guess a stat because it seems fictional, so I didn't split that up. But next year I'm going to try and write down when there's a gay or a bi or whatever character in there so that I can split it up. One thing I do know from looking at the different types of gay characters in the books I'm reading is that there wasn't enough trans characters or non-binary characters or ace characters, so those types of characters that are not gay or bi, I'd like to read more of those types of gay characters, which I'm hoping to read in 2021. More trans, more ace, more non-binary. I have a non-binary friend as well, and I don't think I know of a non-binary book. I haven't read one, so that is a stat I would like to improve. My non-fiction versus my fiction. I read 6 non-fiction and 67 fiction books. That's not surprising to me. I usually read mostly fiction, but it's interesting to know that I read that many fiction books. But 6 non-fiction books isn't too bad. I'm fairly happy with that. I read 4 poetry or books in verse out of the 73, so that's not too bad either. Poetry is definitely not my jam, and I don't know if I'm looking to improve this stat or not. It's just something that's there. Next, we are moving over to my Goodreads stats. Highest and lowest rated books on Goodreads. The highest rated book was Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo, and the lowest rated book on Goodreads I read was Infinity Sun by Adam Silvera. That kind of makes sense. Crooked Kingdom, of course, is the second in the Six of Crows duology, which is one of the most popular books on BookTube, so that's not surprising that it was the highest rated. Also, the second one I do think is better than the first, and most people who read the second one enjoyed the first, so it doesn't surprise me that that second one was very highly rated. It got a 4.58 out of 5 stars. There were lots of other books that were really highly rated. I've got a list here of all the books that were rated above 4.20. We got Six of Crows, Light, The Toll, Night of the Dragon, Slay, The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, A Gathering of Shadows, The Autobiography of Malcolm X, Matilda, Forget Me Not, With the Fire on High, A Conjuring of Light, All the Things We Never Said, Nevermore, Wondersmith, and Hollowpox. So all of them are bloody good reads. I see why they're all high up there on this list. They're all above 4.20s out of 5 stars on Goodreads. As for the lowest, Infinity Sun by Adam Silvera, this one surprises me a little bit because Adam Silvera is so deeply loved in this community. So many people love Adam Silvera, but when this one came out, a lot of people were not happy with it. Adam Silvera fans, not Adam Silvera fans. I don't know why, this book just didn't hit the mark for a lot of people, and I also wasn't a great fan of this book. It didn't make it into my worst books of the year list, but it wasn't far off. If I'm honest, it wasn't great, which is a shame because there was so much love for Adam Silvera, but collectively I think Goodreads viewers have decided this one was just not up there with his best. I'm really curious to see how highly his next one, Infinity Reaper, I'm curious to see how well that one does in the rating. Anyway, that got a 3.25 out of 5 stars, which is still half, but it was the lowest rated that I read. The other ones, the worst ones rated on Goodreads that I read, The Sacrifice Box, The Feed, The Eighth Girl, Firefrost, Trinkets, The 8 Pieces of Silver, and The Surface Breaks. Again, that makes sense. Some of them were on my worst books of the year list, some of them were really meh, so it doesn't surprise me that all of them were bottom at the Goodreads list. Now we go on to the most and least rated or read on Goodreads. This is when people click that they've read the book or they've rated the book. How many people have read and rated these books? The absolute most by far was The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. Not surprising. The Hunger Games is one of the most popular books, YA dystopian books ever. Everyone and their gran has read The Hunger Games. That is not surprising, and I think it's well warranted, so all hail The Hunger Games. That had a whopping, this number, which I don't even want to say because I'll probably say the number wrong. As much as I apparently love numbers in this video, math is not my strength. Had a whopping this amount of reads. A lot of people. This was by far the most, followed by Catching Fire and Mockingjay. So the next highest was The Handmaid's Tale as well, with this many. So that's not surprising because it's a classic that's been out for a long time. So a lot of people have read that. It was really interesting with this one to see what was really popular. It was like kind of not surprising, but but slightly surprising. This one was so beyond high, and then the next few were classics basically. That was very interesting to me, and this one beat the other ones out by like thousands and thousands. Nothing else came close. As for the least read and rated on Goodreads, that goes to the 8 Pieces of Silver, which is funny because this is my worst book of the year. The one I did the rant video on. I hated it, so the fact that the least amount of people have read this, I ain't bothered by it. I'm not going to tell you to go read it. I was going to say, oh, go read and support the author, but no, I didn't like it. 155 people rated and read 8 Pieces of Silver, and I'm one of those people. Didn't like it. So really lowly rated, and that's fine by me. Some of the others that were really lowly rated, and I mean in the hundreds rather than the thousands, these were the only ones that were like under a few hundred. The Saviour's Sister, The Girl with the Lost Smile, and Firefrost. That makes sense because Firefrost is a release that I read on NetGalley. It makes sense that that one hasn't really circulated and hasn't got a lot of buzz. The Girl with the Lost Smile, which is a comedian writing a children's story. Not surprising at all that not many people on Goodreads have rated, said they've read this book. There's probably more people out there that haven't read this book, but they are probably not Goodreads people, so that makes sense. And then there's The Saviour's Sister by Jenna Moreci, which got an appallingly low amount of ratings, in the hundreds, which is crazy because Jenna Moreci has a huge following, and rightly so, and the fact that she got only a few hundred rates on Goodreads, we need to bump up those numbers, people. That's not good enough. I'm willing to bet she's got way more on Amazon. If I'd have done this exact same stats on Amazon instead of Goodreads, I think this list would be completely different, which is really interesting. Goodreads people are the book nerds of the world. Amazon is the more the commercial world. So that's just very interesting to me that those two worlds don't always intersect, and we need to get Jenna Moreci, an indie author, bumped up on Goodreads. So yeah, I learned that, which we need to change. Jenna Moreci fans need to unite and get her more ratings on Goodreads. Next we have the longest and the shortest books I read this year. The longest book I read in 2020 was A Conjuring of Light by Victoria Schwab, with a total of 667 pages. That's a fair chonker for me, although it flew by. I don't remember it being that big at all, so that's good. The smallest book I read was This Winter by Alice Oseman, coming in at 102 pages. That book was teeny tiny and was kind of like graphic novel-y. It's not really surprising, but it is very interesting, and that is by far the lowest amount of pages I read. The next one up from that was a minimum 200, maybe 300 pages. That was by far the lowest, by quite a margin. And as I said earlier, the mean average page count was 348.80. I don't read teeny books, although I don't read huge tomes either. Usually it's between 300 and 400. Next we have the female to male author split. This one was really interesting. So while I was going through each of my months and checking, it was like January, February, March, 50-50 split, male, female, male, female, male, female. And then it got nearer the summer, and suddenly it was all female books, all female authors, and that was kind of crazy. The female numbers skyrocketed, and then in October it was all men. I read solidly male in October. Why? Who knows? And so my total is this: 22 male books versus 51 female books, which is really cool that I read way more female than male. If I hadn't have done this statistic, I couldn't have possibly told you what this split was. I wouldn't have even been able to hazard a guess. I wouldn't have said it would have been this favoured in the female side. I would have said it probably would have been about even, but that's really cool. I like reading female authors because female authors tend to write females better, and I am a female. We all know the men writing women thread. We know that sometimes men can struggle with women. Not all, obviously. That's a fun time, going through some of those, but we don't want to go into that right now. So that's a really interesting stat. Go women in publishing, you're on fire. At least the books I read anyway. Next we have the country setting. Now this one was a really difficult stat to put together, but I managed it. It's weird, so let me go through it. So the biggest chunk, which is no surprise to anyone, is the America category. Now, before I get someone complaining, because I know this will happen, I've got Canada in brackets, and that's not because Canada and America are the same. It's because there was only one book I read that was Canadian, and that was a poetry book. The author was Canadian, so it wasn't really set in Canada, but I had to put it somewhere, so it kind of went in the American category. Don't at me. That's why Canada is in brackets. If it was an actual book set in Canada, it would have gotten its own slice, but say la vie. The next biggest category is obviously the UK. I'm UK. It makes sense. Those two countries tend to dominate the publishing industry, especially for English speakers, so that wasn't a surprising number. 24 American and 17 UK. I'd like to read more UK books because I'm from the UK and it's more relatable for me. The next biggest category I put was fantasy. So this was where it was in a completely fantastical setting that had no frame on anything whatsoever. So it wasn't set in the real world at all. And then some of the fantasy books I put in fantasy, the place where it's based off, because there were so many books that were based off of a real place, but it was a fantasy kind of book. This one again was really difficult to split because some of them were like really light on the fantasy and others were like deep fantasy. So it was very hard to split. For instance, the 3 fantasy UK books were the Dark Shade of Magic trilogy, which is set in London, kind of. It's like the 3 alternative Londons, and Grey London is basically real life London. So it was too realistic to real London for me not to have it be in the UK section, but also it was a fantasy. You see where my troubles lie. The 2 Scandinavian books were Little Mermaid retellings, basically. The 6 fantasy Asian books, I read a load of fantasy that was like Asian inspired by Japan or China. That had to be said. I read books set in Asia, but they were fantasy based, so I could read some more books set in real Asia instead of the fantasy, but I think they're worth recognising because a lot of Asian culture was in those fantasy books. I read the 1 fantasy Africa book, which was A Song of Race and Ruin. 1 book was set in Australia. That was How It Feels to Float, a contemporary, so no fantasy here, solidly set in Australia. I really want to up that number for Oceania. And 3 books set in Europe, and those 3 books were historical fiction and classics. With this stat, you have to take it with a fair pinch of salt. Some of them is a real struggle to know where to place. For instance, The Handmaid's Tale, that is set in future America, but it's very dystopian, so it's almost like edging on fantasy, but it's not quite, and it was set in America, so I put that in the American section. But The Hunger Games, Pan Am, I put in the fantasy section, even though a lot of people say it was based in America, and that is future America, but it's never referred to as America in the books, so I just said it was a fantasy place. It's really difficult sometimes to split these books up to be accurately where they deserve to be, because there's so much crossover. I definitely need to read more books set in more places around the world. This is what I know. Next up, we have the age category. So I only included 3 categories here because these are the only 3 categories pretty much I read. So I've got the children and middle grade category, the young adult category, and the adult category. I didn't read any new adult, so I just didn't add that into the pie chart. I read 8 children's and middle grade, 48 YA, and 17 adult. This makes sense to me. I'm not unhappy with this number. I think that's fair. I mostly read YA with a fair chunk of adult and a little bit of children and middle grade. I think that's fair. I think that's totally representative of the types of books I read. I'd like to maybe read some more adult books, more new adult, and maybe a few more middle grades, but to be honest, if this stat was exactly the same next year, I wouldn't be disappointed by it. It's cool. This stat doesn't mean a whole lot to me, but it's interesting and it represents exactly what I thought my reading was. The next split we have is the format, so whether I read it physically, audio, or Kindle. Physically, I read 57 books. Kindle, I read 4, and audio, I read 12. So that's a pretty fun stat. I knew I read mostly physical because that's what I read most. I really upped my audiobooks this year, which was really fun, and I didn't read many Kindle, which is fine because I prefer not to read Kindle if I can. Most of those were probably NetGalley books. I really want to up the audiobooks for next year. I just want to read more books in general, and hopefully the audiobooks are going to get me there. I don't want to read more audiobooks than I read physically, definitely not. I want to read more physical, but hopefully the audiobooks can just help me bump up how many books I read in the year. Maybe a 50-50 split I would be okay with. Yeah, this stat is interesting and it shows I've read more audiobooks than ever before. The next split we have is genres. Remember when I said things are hard to split and make a perfect fit for? Well, this is one of those times. It was really difficult trying to split it in a category that made sense. Do I make fantasy just the big category? Do I include dystopian, or is it a type subgenre of fantasy? Again, this one was a difficult one to figure out. I ended up combining genres that are similar into one big group. So I've got contemporary thriller, which you could also include mystery, fantasy and dystopian, historical or classic, and non-fiction. So for the contemporary section, for instance, some of these books were solid, fluffy contemporaries, others were thrillers. So I know they should kind of be split, but sometimes it's a contemporary with a mystery, really twist in it, but still a contemporary. It was so difficult to find where that line was that I just didn't include the line. I made it one big category. Same as fantasy and dystopian. Some of them were so clearly fantasy, like A Six of Crows, and then sometimes those lines really merged together. It's very difficult, so I just made it one big category. And historical and classics I put together, because they're both basically historical to me. So I read 26 in the contemporary and thriller category, 35 in the fantasy and dystopian category, 5 in the historical and classic, and 7 in the non-fiction. I think this is a really good split, and it does definitely represent what I like to read. More fantasy and dystopian than anything else. Yes, please, that is my wheelhouse. If you know me, you know dystopian is my favourite genre, and I'm really into my fantasy this year. That is completely representative of who I am as a reader. The next biggest category was contemporary and thriller, which makes sense because that's the other biggest side of the publishing industry, I think, and I've definitely read a lot more contemporaries this year or last year than ever before. I think a lot of the time I read contemporaries as well, it's usually a gay or a BIPOC contemporary. I want to read more fantasies that include those things. I read a lot of fantasy, but I have been getting into some contemporary. As long as it's not super fluffy and there's like grit and angst in there, I can be down. I say I'm not a contemporary person, but this pie chart says it's up there. I've read a fair amount of historical fiction and classics, which is fine by me. I think I read 2 classics this year, the others were historical fiction, and then 7 non-fic, which were mostly autobiographies, and there was 1 self-help book, there was a poetry. I'm happy with that. I'd like to read maybe a little bit more non-fiction. I'm not really bothered about historical fiction and classics, to be honest. In fact, classics, I've decided I don't care. Classics can die. I really don't care, but I'll do a video on that another time. This represents me as a reader pretty well. And the last of these like pie charts that I've got is the standalone versus series. So I read 42 standalones and 31 series. Not 31 series, but 31 books that were a part of the series. This really intrigued me because if you'd have asked me which I'd read more, I probably would have said I've probably read more series. I read a lot of series. Most of my favourite books are series. Fantasies and dystopians tend to be in a series. That's what I thought I'd read most of, when in fact it was standalones, which was very interesting. I think series were very popular a few years ago, but now standalones are really coming in, bulking out the publishing industry, which is really interesting to me. Sometimes it's great to just read a standalone and not need anything else. But obviously a lot of contemporaries tend to be standalone, and I read 1 fantasy standalone I remember this year. That was a really interesting statistic to me. It's not far off, they're very close to each other. It's almost a 50-50 split, but to sway in the way of standalones was, I thought, pretty cool. I don't have a preference for which way this pie chart swings, but it's just an interesting stat for me to look at. My favourite reread this year was All the Things We Never Said. I loved that book. I loved it the first time I read it. It was the best reread I had this year. I should have done a reading for the first time and reread split. I should have done a chart for this. Maybe I'll sneak one in, but I don't know the numbers. See, I'm still thinking of more charts, and that's it. I'm done. No more. I'm drowning in numbers. I have a huge document which I spent literal days filling in, scouring through Goodreads to find all the ratings and going through 73 books worth of information and trying to categorize everything into its perfect place and have everything be representative of what it should be and not try and sway the statistics. Oh my god, I'm going mad. I'm calling it, I'm cutting it there. Those were my statistics for 2020. What a good reading year. Everything else in 2020 was 2020, but my reading year was great, and that's what we're talking about. Some of those stats were really interesting to me to find out. Others were not surprising at all, and I really love going through stats. It highlights where your reading is, represents you as a reader. Some things surprise you, some things indicate where you should be going in the new year, in 2021. I know I need to read certain things, like the queer stat, for instance. I didn't think the side characters in the queer section would be so slim. And the country setting, I know that there needs to be more focus on other countries and not just fantasy. There's a lot of information to be gleaned from stats. I just find them so fun. I find them fun to fill in and look at and do charts. And if you do too, then that's probably why you stayed to the end of this probable mess of a video. I had so many numbers and charts coming out my arse. I hope I made it look professional. Probably not. But thank you for sticking by me in 2020, and hopefully you'll stick by me in 2021. Hopefully you had a good reading year. Tell me in the comments down below, what was your favourite stat? The stat that surprised you, the stat that didn't surprise you at all, or your favourite stat from 2020. You can tell me how many books you read, you can tell me your favourite book. Did you read more male or female? That was one of my surprising stats. Let me know down below in the comments. Thank you for watching. My throat is hurting. Please like this video. If you want to subscribe, I'm so close to 200 subscribers. I'm on 195 right now. So if you could sub and get me to 200, that would be nice. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.